Hey everyone, so in this video I thought I would talk to you about some of my favorite tools that I use around here for making props, and I'm gonna skip over some that you might expect, like a Dremel tool. Most people would say that screwdrivers, drills, things of that nature, and I'm just going to go over some of the stuff that I either use a lot or maybe it would even be something that's kind of unexpected or a little unusual. The first one I'm going to go with is pretty common, the hobby knife. Yeah, I know, that's not really outside the box too much, but it is something I use all the time. And you always see warnings that say, be very careful. Yeah, I am so full of punctures throughout my life of using hobby knives. A lot of times straight in on a finger. So yeah, definitely be careful using them. I'm actually surprised I haven't lost a couple digits already. One thing I would say about it is don't be too precious about buying replacement blades and replacing them often. I used to be one of those people. I'd buy a pack of, 3 or 5 or maybe 10 blades at a time, and I was overly frugal with them. Now, I'll get a pack of 100, and the price isn't really that bad. Really, when you buy them in lower quantities, you are spending a lot more per blade. So, that's one we're going to go with. On the topic of cutting, scissors. Yeah, I know, that seems kind of obvious, right? I would say not just any old scissors, get sewing scissors. These cut so much better than just an average everyday pair of scissors. If there is a seamstress in your life that has a pair of sewing scissors, do not use them. Go and get your own. If they murder you for using their scissors, you have no one to blame but yourself. Don't say I didn't warn you. So there we go. As far as some other cutting type tools, this is a pair of snips. However, the important thing about this pair is they're really flat on one side. So you can have a regular pair of wire cutters like this, but if you have to get right up against something, these work a lot better. And you'll sometimes see them where they're kind of expensive in hobby shops. I got these at Harbor Freight, I think, for like $3. And a lot of times in hobby shops, you'll see them, they're, 13 or more dollars. So, and it cuts just as well. Long nose pliers. These are great for handling stuff in small spaces that you can't get into. I would say if you can find a pair that have some sort of texture to it to help grip, that works better. This particular pair, I tend to have stuff that that comes off the end a little more than I would like, but haven't been able to find any where they tend to have a lot of grip on the end of these really long ones. So let's get into measuring. Got a ruler, but what is so fancy about this ruler? It's see-through, and this makes it really, really exceptional for a lot of things. For example, if you wanted a cut that was half an inch from the edge of something, you can actually line it up with this center point, and then you still have your straight edge that you can cut or mark along. So this is very, very handy, and even on the edge here, it has increments. So no matter which way you turn this, it works very well. Now, this one only has inches on, but I'm sure you can get them that they also have metric, even if it's a separate ruler. I buy multiples of these at a time because a lot of times from cutting, I end up gouging parts of the edge. So This is one of those things you say, a ruler. What's so fancy about it? But this works so much better than just your average run-of-the-mill ruler. Along those lines, I have another little Hobby T-square here. Now this has, I believe this has both metric and, has both metric and standard on. This is really nice, and it was kind of expensive. I think it was like 14 bucks for just, what was this, like 4-inch long. But it's really, really handy. You know how big full-size squares are, and that would be kind of awkward if you're trying to just score a little piece of plastic or mark something small. So despite the fact that this was kind of expensive, I thought it was worth it, and I use this thing an awful lot. So very useful. This is something I use all the time, caliper. But I have a digital one, and I really love this thing. And you can actually switch modes depending how you want to see something fractionally. It has, both inches and metric. And if it gets fouled up and something's off, like this is off a little, you can just zero it back. Really handy. I use this thing all the time. Go through a lot of batteries. It takes a little watch battery in here. But I find that this is so much nicer than just one where you're reading the gauge, because you can get really precise with it. This is one of those things, not necessarily cheap, but definitely worth it. Like I said, use it all the time. So here's some other things dealing with holding stuff. I have this clamp here, and it doesn't seem like a big deal, but you would not believe how many of these I use. I use them for holding together mold boxes, or a lot of times when I'm assembling wood items and using wood glue and I have to have stuff clamped together. I must have 20 to 30 clamps like this. Specifically the ones that have the little dial type handle on it. Very useful. Also, this is good for a lot of stuff. These types of clamps, they tend to have a lot of tension on them. This adjustable end, which is kind of nice. You do have to watch though. I got a whole bag of these once as a gift from somebody, and the first time I used them, I had a number of them just snap right in here. I wasn't even putting a tremendous lot of pressure on it. It was just the plastic was poorly manufactured. So have to be careful, because you overstress one of these, the thing might break apart and go flying. This is also something really handy. You can adjust it all around. I think these are sometimes called helping hands. And you can clip different light items, and you still have the magnifying glass if you're holding something very small. I find that this is very good for when I'm wiring electronics. I can hold, say, a switch or something here, so that way it's easier to solder together. Nice little thing to have. Has a weighted bottom, so unless you're putting something really heavy on it, it should stay where you put it. Now, speaking of holding stuff together, we'll talk about some glues. This is super glue, and I found that if you use enough super glue, it'll work for pretty much anything. This, if you see here, it says gap filling. So this is specially made if you have something where it's not pressed together really firmly. It might have a little bit of a gap to it, that this will still be able to bridge that gap. And they do, it says medium set here, and you can see how long it sets for. And you can get it where it's fast setting or slow setting. I usually go for the medium. This is not the brand Hobbytown. I've bought this glue from multiple places, and a lot of them put their own label. over top of it. This is 2 ounces. This was $10, but you can find this online. And I found that this super glue works really, really well. And so when I find something that works, I tend to, stick with it for a while. And $10 isn't bad, because I've seen like little tiny disposable bottles of, well, I guess this is disposable, but disposable bottles of super glue that will cost almost that much for just like a tiny little bit. But this stuff works really well. I forget what the actual brand is, because they have this over top of it, but you get a good view of what the bottle looks like. The other glue I like to use is E6000. Now this dries fairly fast, and it's clear, and you can use it on just about anything. The nice thing about this is that it's removable. So if you do have 2 things that are together, you can generally get them apart, and if you worked on it hard enough, scraped it or something like that, you could actually remove the glue. The one thing about this, though, it's not very thin. It's very thick glue, unlike super glue, which is very runny and will get everywhere. So that means if you have 2 things where you really want them precisely up against each other, this may not be the best thing, because trying to compress those 2 parts together so that there's not a gap is going to be a little bit tougher with something like this. But between these 2 glues, I use these 2 for just about everything. Here's something very, very handy, is needle files. And they're just like the big files that you find most places, but these you probably have to go to a hobby shop, and they're all different shapes. Some are square, some are oval, and when you really have to do some very fine detail work, these are nice. Say for example, you had a part like this where you needed the inner corner to be really squared off, and maybe you have a bit of material here you want to remove. Using a very small file like this can be handy for that sort of thing. Sanding block. Now, generally where you see sanding blocks like this tend to be, this is more for automotive type stuff, this kind of sanding block. But it really works for any time you have to sand something. So it's really nice, even as just something to hold the sandpaper a little more taut. I can, I don't have anything to show you really, but, you can just do it by hand or run it over something. Just really nice, handy tool to have. These here are really neat. I didn't even know these existed until a couple years ago. They're basically Q-tips, but where a Q-tip has a lot of fibers, a lot of loose fibers, this does not. It feels very solid when you touch these. And these I found are really good for paint, where you need just a little dot of paint on something and a brush would just smear it all over the place. I found that these are very good for that. That's mainly what I use these for, is painting. And like I said, you're generally going to have to go to some sort of hobby or craft store to get these. And then last thing I'm going to show is Tamiya putty. And this is good for filling in holes or scratches, filling in gaps and things like that for plastic. I use this stuff all the time. It's what I recommend in a lot of my instructions for our resin kits. I used to recommend something called Squadron Putty, but they don't make that anymore. So this is now what I've been using. There's another brand, AK Modeling Gray Putty, which I have not tried this at all, but I kind of assume it's along the same lines. Squadron Putty in this is, pretty close to the same thing. So anyway, I just thought those were some different items that if whether you're new or old to modeling, you may or may not have known about. I get asked questions all the time about what kind of glue I recommend, what kind of paint I recommend, things of that nature. So I thought I would also cover some of the tools that I use and would recommend.